Okay.
All right. So the Battle of Marianna was the, sorry, let me start over. The Russ House Commons was the site of the Battle of Marianna during the Civil War of 1864. Construction of the home didn't begin until 30-some years later in 1892. It was built by Joseph Washington Russ Jr., pictured here. It took him 3 years to complete the house, and it was finished in 1895. He built the house for himself and his mother, Mary. Unfortunately, she only lived for 2 years before she passed. So much of the history of the house focuses around Joseph and his wife and daughter. I always like to point out to folks while we're up here at the front the difference in old glass versus new glass. This panel was replaced after Hurricane Michael in 2018, whereas the remainder of them are the original glass. So you really get to see some of that waviness and distortion in some of the original glass.
Wow. That is so cool.
So shortly after Joseph's mom's passing, he met his soon-to-be wife, Betty Phillips, who's pictured here in the top left. They had one child together, Frances, who was born in 1900, and she's pictured everywhere else on the mantle. Joseph was a very wealthy businessman and owned thousands of acres of farmland, a few general stores, and the first taxi service for the area. Instead of the rags to riches kind of story, this is much more the opposite, which is pretty common for the time period. Now, some years later, in 1920, Frances is all grown up, and she marries a professional baseball player by the name of George Dickerson. George only played one game before he was drafted into World War I, where he had an unfortunate encounter with mustard gas, causing him to contract tuberculosis. After he was released from the war, him and Frances moved into the home together with hopes to build their own home on the property, but unfortunately because of his illness, those plans never came to be. Now, I always like to point out that the flooring in the home is original Douglas fir pine. It's not in its original placement, but it is the original flooring. The pocket door is in its original placement.
Oh, wow.
It's well over 125 years old, and it comes all the way across from one side. Most pocket doors would actually come from both sides.
That is so cool. Wow.
Now, there were originally 8 fireplaces in the home. However, today there are only 6. 2 were taken out to add an elevator to remain ADA compliant.
Gotcha.
We'll come over to here. Now, this would have been the sunroom. So this would have had a lot of relaxation, maybe some naps going on every day around 4:30 when it's not gloomy and sad out. This corner of the room lights up, and it makes it a little difficult to get as much work done because the temperature is just perfect for a nap. The top window there is an original window there, so you'll get more of that waviness and distortion. Now, in 1925, Betty, Joseph's wife, became very sick. They did attempt to find her care all throughout the region to find out what was going on with her. So they went from New Orleans to Jacksonville to Atlanta, but unfortunately they weren't able to figure out what was going on with her. She ended up passing in 1925, and Frances later journaled that her father became recluse and uninterested in his businesses, which is really uncommon for someone who had amassed so much fortune from his businesses. Now, he did attempt to find happiness again, and he ended up remarrying in 1929. However, shortly after remarrying, the stock market crash occurred and the Great Depression followed, and he subsequently took his own life because of losing most of his businesses and a majority of his land. They basically not auctioned off, but each of the property got smaller and smaller as they started taking taxes back for it. This would have been originally the interior kitchen. There would have also been an exterior kitchen where larger meals would have been cooked because no one wants to be cooking a hot meal in a Florida home during the summertime. So smaller meals would have been cooked inside and larger meals would have been cooked outside. Now, everything in these cabinets are original to the home. These are late 1800s and early 1900s pieces. So after Joseph's passing, Frances is now caring for her husband and her 2 children in a home that is much too large for them. Because George was unable to provide for the family financially, they did end up getting a divorce, which is pretty uncommon for the time period. Shortly after the divorce, George passed away, and Frances is now fully the sole caregiver for her children in the home. She started to rent the bottom part of the house out for public and private events and offered catering for that as well, and we have some of the china that she would have been serving her meals on. In addition to renting out the downstairs, she started to rent the upstairs out for returning veterans, traveling soldiers, and others to be able to raise more money for the family. In addition to those efforts, she took a job at the local welfare office where she worked for 35 years before retiring. Now, as we come up the stairs at the turnaround, we do have A flag that is not original to the home, but it was donated to the visitor center as a period piece. This flag actually only has 45 stars on it. It was created in 1896 when Utah joined the Union and flew until 1907 when Oklahoma became the 46th state. Now the staircase is also not original to the home. This was added as an exterior staircase later on for Joseph to be able to come and go as he pleased. It goes directly into his bedroom here. Joseph did have a bit of a drinking problem, which certainly contributed to some of his actions later in life. This would have been his bedroom here. You would have seen a fireplace here. We do have, this is also allegedly where Joseph took his own life. So there's, I'm not able to show you right now, but there is a section in the bathroom where some stains continue to pop up despite being painted over, cleaned up, and that's allegedly the blood of Joseph that comes out still from that.
And this was his closet.
So the closet would have actually been in the bathroom. I think these walls were added later on.
Oh, okay.
Depending on when Zach finishes up, I might be able to take it out there. Now, this would have actually been a series of smaller bedrooms. If you follow along this beam here and take a look at each of the windows, they're all different sizes and different placements, so you can get an idea of where those bedrooms
Okay, I gotcha.
So these would have been Frances's nanny's rooms prior to her starting to rent the upstairs out as a bed and breakfast. Today, the room is used as a boardroom for the Chamber of Commerce, the Economic Development Council, and the Tourist Development Council. In addition to that, we do rent the space out for various events. So we've had weddings be held here, different bridal showers, baby showers, and we've also had church services held here. Do y'all want to go outside?
Yeah. It's a little chilly, but
I always like to point out when folks are coming out onto the porch the engineering feat of the porch. Not only is it slanting out and down, but it also slopes around the entire part of this house. And that's to be able to prevent rainwater from standing on the porch. Now, the columns are relatively newer than the rest of the house. They were built about 10, 15 years after the rest of the house. So they're relatively newer, but they have an incredible amount of detail in them. All of them were hand carved and painted. So the cupola would have had I'm trying to think of the correct word. You'd be able to open up the windows from down here. So once the windows open, along with the high ceilings, that will be your southern air conditioning and ventilation system. It'll allow all of the heat to escape out through the top.
wow.
So that'll help during the summer months, and then the fireplaces will help keep things warm during the winter.
Right.
Now the handrail is original to the home. Folks were much shorter stature back in the day, and they also had a lot less building codes. So we did have to add the metal rebar in to be able to remain compliant with building codes and keep anyone from toppling over.
Wow, it is so short. I mean, even for me, I'm only 5'2", and this is a really short rail.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Now this would have been Frances's bedroom. So Frances spent most of her life in the home, and she lived to be 89 years old. In her mid-80s, she did suffer a fall, and at that point, she would have moved downstairs to one of the bedrooms that were on the main floor. But we can imagine she would likely have spent a great amount of time up here.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, despite the appearance of the microwave in this room, this is not quite as ancient as the rest of the house. The interior kitchen that I pointed out downstairs near the printer was moved up here during a restoration project in the late 1990s. Now, as we come down the stairs, you'll get a really great view of the crown molding that goes throughout most of the home. So after Frances's passing, her children and grandchildren started to care for the home, and they attempted to go through their own restoration projects. However, they were unable to secure financing to do so. Around that time, the property was deeded over to the Chamber of Commerce in the county to start restoration. That project was started in 1996 and was completed in 2000. I always like to point out to folks, if you saw some of the one of the photos that's in there, and I can point it out over here as well, but there actually was a gas station that was built on the corner there sometime around the 60s or 70s. And so when the county was deeded the property, they went ahead and they seized that property back as it was pretty run down and decrepit at that point, and they wanted to really restore the entire space to be a historical space for the visitor center. So really, because of